Good evening, everyone. My name is Julius. I'm going to present CSS values and units. In when we're doing web development, obviously we need to know the CSS part, and we've been doing this in class. We've been creating our CSS files every time we are creating a new project. So basically, CSS has several different units for expressing different values and units. So, but before that, I guess I need to explain what the difference between the values and um, and the units. All right, there are two types of values according to what I've researched: textual values and numerical values. You will see this in your codes. There is what we call custom ident, and there is also what we call ident, and there's what we call a string, and then you have the URL. Now you can see that right, these four parts here. I'm not going to touch more into details. That's why I've attached the source here, where I've got all this information for you to just to read more in depth. But I will want to touch a little bit on the numerical values, since this is especially at the beginning of our course, this is what we'll be using most of the time. So you can see that the values, you can spot them because they are all surrounded by angle brackets. You can see angle brackets in all of them. That is to show you that this is actually, those are values. Next slide. As I said, I'm going to talk about numeric values. Part of that is dimension. When you're talking about dimension, the definition here says it's a number with a unit attached to it. For example, we have 45 DEG, which is 10 for degrees, and meters per second, and then we have the PX, which is stands for pixels. So the identifier is case sensitive, meaning that we should not leave any space between 45 and DEG. Otherwise, we will not get the right thing. For example, here, this is not right. This is wrong. So I've just attached a lot of units there, dimension units. And by the way, there is what we call relative length units, and then we have absolute length units. Just to go back, the relative length units, basically we're talking about EM, which you basically stands for the font size within an element, EX, which is the X height of the element, and so forth. We most of the time we are using the REM, which is the rem, which is font size, or we use it EM, which is also the font size of the element. All right, move on to the next one, which is the absolute length. I think I'm going to touch a little bit more on that, because when you talk about the numeric type, you'll come to across is usually the length. For example, 10 pixels, you can see pixels here, which is basically around about 30 em. There are two types of length in CSS. Before I go that, there are two types of length in CSS: relative and absolute length, as I've mentioned it earlier on. Let's now look at the difference. Going back to the, all right, sorry. Here, the absolute length units, they are not relative to anything else, and are generally considered to always be the same. They do not change. So we have those are relative, absolute. Most of these values are more useful when used for printing rather than putting it on the screen. For example, we don't typically use centimeters on the screen. We use, instead of centimeters, we use pixel. And then going back to our relative units, The relative length units are relative to something else, perhaps the size of the parent element, font, or the size or the viewpoint. And the benefit of using relative unit is that with some careful planning, you can make it so that the size or the text of the elements scale can relatively be to something on the other page. So we have, for example, an example of width. We can set our width using pixels as an absolute unit of length. There are other things like maybe I can also just show you. Before that, I can just let me get out of the PowerPoint and just go to my VS Code here. As you can see here, I have my small CSS file. You can see on my header here, I have background. And then this background part, it's also basically it's also a value, okay? But then the units for that background, obviously it will be in words, it will be a blue violet color. But if you look at the bottom, you have padding here on the top, which is 10 pixel. So the unit there is, the value is 10 and pixel is the unit. So even if you look at the bottom here, we have other data types or other values. For example, float left. So both of them are like words, but one represent the unit and the other one represent the value. In this case, we have float, which represent the value, and then left, which represent the unit. And in this case, we have width, which represent the value, and then we have 27.2%, 0.2, which is the value, and then the percent part will be the units. So basically, that is how I understand what the values and units. If I can get out of this and see again, if I can give you more examples out of the screen, going back to my PowerPoint. There are other units that we'll be using in class most of the time, which I have not touched on them because of time. For example, if we look at number 6, we have mixing percentage and dimension. I think this is something that we'll be using a lot of mixing of units and values. Number 7 also use special data types like color and image and position. These are things that we've been using already. They don't fall under absolute or relative. These are special values or special data types. And number 8 is functional notation units. If you are to make any calculation using CSS, so when you are doing web development, you might be using some functions. And these functions, for example, like the maximum function or the sum function, these are functions that you'll be using, but they are also in position of holding values and units. So, all right, that's the end of the slideshow. Just to get out of here, maybe for more information, like I said in the previous, I've attached a website where I got the sources from. I will advise you that you go through it and read it more in depth. I know I've rushed through this presentation, but I've quite learned a lot of things. Just to run through the slide again, I forgot to explain about this. Is just something that I took from the internet that gives us show us what are the values and what are the units. Like you can see here, 12. We have 12 units, and then value is 12, and then pixels is the unit. So these are some of the things that we can learn from. So yeah, if there's any questions, you guys are welcome to ask me on the forum. I'll appreciate any feedback from you guys. Thank you so much.